school. I keep going back to school to figure out what I want to be. And I was with Shell Oil for 14 years, which has nothing to do with medical ethics.
Excuse me one moment, Rebecca. I just wanted to say that the recording has just been turned on. And so from here on in, the presentation is being recorded.
So watch what I say. Okay. Well, hopefully we're not going to watch what we're going to say because we're going to have a discussion. And so at Shell Oil, I was predominantly in human resources. My love was I was a labor negotiator. And I had a really great career, but it wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I went back to school again and I landed in academic medicine. And so I, again, am in the very privileged position of being able to critique kind of what's going on. So my latest thing is a couple of years ago, I was asked to create a course for our genetic counseling students, an ethics course, looking at the ethics of genetic testing. So, okay, great. So what does this have to do with anything? So all of a sudden I started immersing myself in this literature, and I'm going to pivot for a second. And I do this thing for those of you who don't have your cameras on, I would love for you to turn them on. But as an educator, I have found that like putting up PowerPoints kind of, it puts a break in what we're doing. And so I have some questions to ask you. And so we're going to use the thumb method. It's a very try and true method. Everyone has a thumb, right? And so I'm going to ask you questions and I'll tell you thumbs up is this, thumbs down is this. And then the nice thing about the thumbs, it gives you flexibility for the I don't know. But here's a really easy one.
And if you for some reason cannot put your camera on and you want to put your vote in the chat, we'll watch that as well.
Please chat away again, because I want to have a conversation with you. But I'd also like to see, okay, who's on this call? So question one, do you or men, your partner, have you had children? Yes, no, and hopefully there's no I don't knows here, okay? This would be really, okay. So 2 people have not, Debbie, children, no children? Okay, you're unmuted.
Stepchildren.
Sorry, you said for men.
Oh, no, I'm saying, okay, you have stepchildren. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so question 2, for those of you who had children, did you ever have any type of genetic testing? Yes, no, I don't know. Okay, so let's start the conversation. What type of genetic testing did you have? Who wants to start?
Tay-Sachs.
So you had the blood test for Tay-Sachs?
Yes.
Correct.
Before I had children.
Okay. Anyone else have anything different?
I had BRCA 1 and 2, but not for children, for my own.
Okay, this was prior, but not for when you were pregnant.
Not when I was pregnant.
Okay, thank you for, and we may get to that, so thank you for that. Anyone else have any type of pre-pregnancy or during pregnancy? Who said yes?
Hannah Martin, Sue Martin, it says, dysautonomia.
Oh, okay. So you had it, you had that when you were pregnant?
Because what happened was my cousin had it. And so we were very cognizant of the fact that it was around because I had never heard of it until. So then we started the testing and discovered it.
And
I missed that, Hannah. What was the testing for?
Dysautonomia. It's a Jewish genetic illness.
I'm sorry. I thought you were telling Rebecca you sort of know me.
I do sort of know you. Thank you. But yeah.
okay. So anyone else want to share anything? Someone put something in the chat. Husband was tested for BRCA. I don't know what PMS2 is. Premenstrual syndrome 2? No, I don't think your husband was tested for that, but that'd be interesting. Tested negative, cousin's positive. Okay, so I can only share kind of my my pregnancy journey. And again, I welcome all thoughts about this. So I too, when I think it was before we got pregnant, we too, my husband and I, we too were tested for Tay-Sachs. And that is still, and that's been really a success story, and we'll get to that in a second. But in doing work, and then because I was considered an elderly pregnant woman, I had amniocentesis. Okay, did anyone else have amnio? Nope, nope, nope. Okay, so I would ask you to think about, so amnio, as you know, it's fairly invasive, and it's where they insert a needle into the woman's abdomen, into the fetal sac, and they actually are able to take out cells that can then test for genetic abnormalities. And when we talk about genetic abnormalities, we're really talking about single cell disorders. So that would be Tay-Sachs, that would be some muscular dystrophies, that would be cystic fibrosis, that would be Down syndrome, okay? And so why do we test for these? Why do you think? Yeah, hi. That's a great name.
Well, to determine if you're going to abort or to make plans of what you need to do.
Right. Okay, absolutely. So Thumb's question, and I know this is sensitive stuff, but it's gonna come around. So okay, so put yourself in your 30-something-year-old bodies. Can we all do that? Men, pretend you're women. No, pretend you're the loving spouse of someone. So if you, in your 30-something-year-old bodies, underwent genetic testing and found out that you were carrying a fetus that had Down syndrome, would you abort that fetus? Do you think? I know I'm asking you to kind of give it. Yes, no, I don't know. Okay, I guess I should participate in this. No. Okay, this gets me to the article. Okay. Anyone else want to chime in on this? Because this is a sensitive topic. We're talking about abortion now. So in
I'd like to say something just from a lot of things that I've read from people who have, for instance, Harold Kushner, who wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good People, had a child who died as a teenager. It was very painful. But he talks so much about how he loved those limited time. I think it was 14 years. There was something that I read from Abraham Tversky about a family. Just the idea of the people who I know who have had children with those kind of severe needs, and most of them, well, I can't say most, just personal anecdote. I've just met so many people who would have been horrified to think about not having that child, that child's cause has been very difficult, but that still a child who they love.
Oh, it's a very difficult reality when you have that child in your home. And it is a very disruptive home, as much as you would like to think not. I'm going to address dysautonomia. There are no tear ducts. There were no swallowing ability. The child was in and out of the hospital. She lived longer than any or most children. There's only one other child that I know that's living to this day. And that's because his parents are in the medical field, and his mother can, in a snap of a finger, get all the medical help she will need. This other child, my niece, was in and out of hospitals. You don't know if you're there. Tubes for feeding, none ability to do most of the things. It is it's heartfelt and it's only modern technology that kept that child going in this world. And she lived to 14.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Because my other question was going to be, does anyone here have a disabled child? That's a yes, no. Or in my case, sometimes I think my child's disabled, but I really know he's not. That was a little bit of a joke if you know my son. Okay, so
There's also such a long spectrum of what disabilities are. And, that there are people who are high functioning disabled who are also very difficult to care for, people who are low functioning disabled. And when you're testing for it, I don't know the accuracy of how, when you find out that there's going to be a disability, to know, is this going to be someone who is going to be so severely disabled that it's going to be completely disrupt your lives? Or is it someone who's going to have a minimal disability that will be able to function pretty well, but not perfectly? It's a very difficult thing when that term disabled is such a wide spectrum.
Carrie, did you have a thought? Oh, I thought you were going to say something. Okay, so you're absolutely right. The test does not tell us the degree in which your child is going to be disabled. It's just, it's binary, yes, no. So, so to the article that Rabbi Gordon is going to send you all at the end of this, it was a popular media article. It wasn't scientific literature. It was in the Atlantic last year, and it profiled what's going on in Denmark. So in 2004, Denmark became the first country to screen every single pregnant woman for Down syndrome. First country, 2004. And I'm going to ask you a question. What percentage of women who tested positive do you believe terminated their pregnancy? Want to venture to guess?
30.
3%.
What was that, Roger?
3.
3. Ready? 95% of Danish women
Wow.
terminated their pregnancy. 95% choose to have an abortion. And what's even more startling is that in 2019, about 18 Downs babies were born, and a majority of those were born as a result of false negative tests, meaning they had the screening and the screening said your fetus is fine.
But I'm going to assume that the Danes were screening for it because they had identified it as a negative thing that they did not want in their population, and that they had spread that to the women who were taking the test. And so a lot of those women were reacting to the Danish idea of Down syndrome bad, should be aborted.
Perhaps. I mean,
I'm going to say, okay, my daughter-in-law, 9 months pregnant, beautiful pregnancy. She is a pediatrician. In the 9th month, it was discovered the little baby's heart wasn't proper. And the moment he was born, they usually wait between 24 to 72 hours. He would have died. She went for a normal routine physical on her 9th month, and that's when she discovered, and that's when the tears flowed. You have to make a decision. These things are so difficult. So difficult.
They are tremendously difficult. And they force us to ask and reckon with some very difficult things, what Debbie just mentioned. Like, well, what does it mean? So what I'd like to, so in the United States, just let me go back to this. So, you know, in 2019, we had 6,000 babies who were born with Down syndrome. Now, what's really interesting is Down syndrome was the first genetic disease to be detected in vitro. But what's problematic is Downs is also compatible with life, unlike a lot of other disorders. So very seldom is, and it's trisomy 18, that's the disorder. Do we have a baby born with trisomy 18 who's not compatible to living versus some other disorders? I mean, so again, we've taken, the poster child of genetic testing is a non-lethal disorder, right? But I think Debbie's point is really right on. Where is this going? Or do the Danes have this culture? But I asked you before, would you engage in genetic testing, and why do we do it? And, and it was Hai who said, well, 2 reasons. It's either to terminate the pregnancy or to plan for having a child that will likely have some disabilities. So again, it's not this, and in fact, the majority of people who are offered genetic testing and who don't take it is because they don't want to have to make that decision, right? Because it is a very, very tough decision. Okay, so part of the thing in Denmark is there is a Down syndrome organization. There is a woman who is called all the time, who's the leader of this organization by women who are carrying a child who's going to have Downs for information. And, and the biggest fear is not, necessarily, well, there's two things, this idea of, are we entering a phase where we can kind of pick and choose the kind of child we want? And that's where genetic testing is going. Now, what I want to do is share with you kind of what's happening here and now. And, as someone whose kids are in their 20s, I'm just, my mind is kind of shaken up by all of this. So it used to be, in order, if you wanted to know if you were carrying a child with a genetic defect, you had to have this invasive testing, which also comes with a risk of a miscarriage. And so there are women who elect not to undergo that because of the fear of a miscarriage. But guess what, folks? There is now a blood test that has been, you're familiar with this, Deborah? Okay, there's now a blood test.
Yeah,
where,
my daughter had, with both her babies, had the genetic testing done.
With the blood?
With the blood, just with the blood test, yeah.
Right.
Excuse me, Rebecca, were you saying that some of the testing increases the risk of a miscarriage?
It used to.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, because you stick a needle, in a woman, into the sac. And yes, there is, I think it's not high, but there is a risk. But now advances in technology are such that we can detect the DNA of the fetus in the woman's blood. And so, as Deborah just said, now it's as simple as getting a blood draw, right? And it is now standard practice that every woman gets this blood test that detects a number of single cell disorders.
Wow.
Everyone. So it's none of this, you're over 35, you're an old lady to be having a kid. It's now every woman who is pregnant, regardless of their age, is now entitled to a blood test that will let them know if there's whether or not there's a genetic abnormality. And let me just say, that test is then followed up with the more invasive test because it's not specific enough.
And do they have to request that initial test?
No, I mean, it's part of the routine.
So they get tested whether they want it or not?
No, you have.
It's offered.
Go on, Deborah.
It's offered, they say yes or no.
Right, because my daughter with both her babies had the blood test done, but her sister-in-law did not want to, it was about $100 even with insurance, and she didn't want to pay the money. So it was an option.
Oh, they had to pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that.
It's like the insurance company will get whatever they can from, or the hospital will get whatever, or the lab will get whatever they can from the insurance company, and then you pay up to $100. So it could be less depending on the deal your insurance company has with the lab.
Okay, so there's a little bit of a barrier to maybe accessing this, but when I learned this, I was a tad shocked. The fact that, are we going down the road of Denmark? Right? I mean, with having testing so accessible and so easy, what's happening?
Is the testing followed up by counseling of what your options are? Like, this is not life change, life threatening. The baby could survive if, or.
Right, so it does come with genetic counseling. And I have to say my genetic counseling colleagues are very distressed that they're having to counsel healthy people. Like, this is not kind of why they went into it. And, and in fact, one of the students on her thesis was about why people opt in and out of this type of testing. And the number one reason people are engaging in this is to find out the sex of the child. Okay.
That was my daughter.
Okay, which again, I mean, no criticism there at all. But again, this is a test that can reveal a lot more than the sex of the fetus. And so are we going down the path of Denmark? And, I think the biggest question is, what, Mark, did you?
But doesn't it also let you know if you need any kind of emergency attention when the baby's born, special?
Right. No, so I mean, that's the benefit, is that the team is prepared, right? And we even have that at UT. We have a maternal fetal center, which I do some ethics consults for them, and they have everything they need, right, to make sure the baby gets whatever it needs. Lynn, you had a question?
Well, it's not really a question, but in Denmark, they obviously have a very liberal abortion policy. If you can have an abortion 95% of the time because your child tests positive for Down syndrome, which is not the situation in this country, and it varies country by country. So because you have the information does not necessarily mean, even if you want to, that you could carry out what you think you want to do.
Okay, and I am thrilled you brought that up, because that was on my list of things to discuss, is this idea, and you're right, Denmark does have not only do they have a liberal abortion policy, they've got universal health care. I mean, it's kind of a remarkable country in many ways. It's a social democracy to the left of most social democracies. So it is a fabulous place to study. But they do have services available, more so in the United States, for those kids who are born with Downs. I mean, that's what's probably most interesting, is that while on the one hand, someone said, looks like they're encouraging, if they're offering tests to everyone, which we're doing now, we're not marketing it the same way, if you will, right? But they, I don't know if they're encouraging it, but they actually provide these kids with more services than we do in this country, which is crazy. Now, the abortion regulations go hand in hand with this, right? Because you have to question, there's a lot of questions here, and I hope you bring them up, but that's one of them. So under current Texas law, which is about to change again, you are limited to having an abortion. It has to be at 20 weeks or below, unless the fetus has a severe abnormality incompatible with life. So imagine, which is the nice thing about the blood test, right? It's much earlier in the pregnancy than the amnio was. And I forget at what month they do amnio, but it's further along. And I think it's beyond 20 weeks. And so it's beyond the point in which you would be allowed to have an abortion. So Lynn, I mean, it is part and parcel to this.
And is incompatible with life, is that specifically and clearly defined?
Yeah. No. Because I've done about a bit of research on that.
That's a very difficult burden, and that is very, that's subject to such a breadth of opinions. That would be very difficult to decide on a case-by-case basis. And to some degree, it depends upon, I'm sure, the, financial circumstances of the parties involved. So that's, that's an inequitable standard as far as I'm concerned.
It's a terrible standard, and it gets even more complicated. And if I may, let me just share a personal story, because I am influenced by this. So I think it was my third pregnancy. My daughter was born with some congenital heart defects. She's fine. Medicine has been very good to her. So when I became pregnant again, they followed me pretty closely. And this was not Deborah's experience with her daughter getting ultrasound. You got, I think, one ultrasound, if that, when I was pregnant. But they followed me pretty closely. And they detected that the fetus had something called hyperplasm left heart syndrome, which is a condition that is incompatible with life. It would have required, if the fetus had been born alive, it would have needed a heart transplant. Okay. Now, what really kind of totally freaks me out, I terminated the pregnancy. But to think that if I was in now, and there are surgeries available, very aggressive surgeries available to these babies now that do not include a heart transplant that one of my colleagues is performing. But to think that I would have to jump through hoops to terminate this pregnancy, because it was at 21 weeks. So to think, I think a lot about this, to think that if I was in Texas and if someone would have said, no, you're over the 20-week mark, you can't terminate this pregnancy. Part of it is, and again, I really struggle with this idea, back to Hei's point of, we undergo this testing to do usually one of two things. It's to terminate the pregnancy, or it's to plan for a child who's going to have a lot of needs. And to take away one of those decisions, I think, is absolutely unconscionable.
May I interject the Jewish perspective?
Absolutely, because I can't.
Yes. So, but you will after now. So as you might expect, there isn't just one Jewish perspective. But among the Jewish perspectives is one of the ones that is agreed upon is that if a mother's life is in danger, then a pregnancy may be terminated. That the baby who is not born is seen as a predator, and if is seen as someone, if the baby has the potential of killing the mother in childbirth, then the pregnancy can be terminated. Some modern commentaries have looked at the health of the mother, and in that with the health of the mother, some modern commentaries have also said that if there is going to be an undue mental health danger for the mother, then, and this is of course a more liberal perspective, then pregnancy could be terminated. And so the health of the mother is considered more important than the baby's life. And the most liberal of rabbis say that the mental health, if it would be just impossible for this woman to be able to parent a child, then an abortion would be acceptable. So a child who is predetermined to have very severe physical or emotional problems, that might fall under that category. It is a gray category for sure. There is not one Jewish way to look at it, but both modern and ancient rabbis have looked at this question.
Oh my gosh, I think I actually knew that one. Okay, as not a Jewish scholar in any way, shape, or form. And so, yes, I mean, Judaism, especially Reform Judaism, takes a very liberal stance towards termination of pregnancies. I might add, ultra-Orthodox, after the Holocaust, it's almost forbidden. So, I mean, it's really interesting to look at the continuum of it, but to think that the state is intervening, which gets into a whole other topic, you know, about the regulation of these technologies and why we're doing it, is also of paramount, right? When can the government, when do they have a legitimate interest in telling you you can or cannot do something? But the thought of carrying a fetus that is not going to, be born alive or is going to need a lot of treatment, whose decision should that be? Should it be the state or should it be the individual woman in consultation with her healthcare professional? And you probably know where I'm going with that one. And so, yeah, the abortion debate is intricately linked to this. Because again, and I think, here's what's really interesting, because we haven't talked about kind of the role of money in this, but I'm sure all of you know, and Sue, you said it beautiful, hauntingly, I might add, about, what it's like to raise a severely disabled child. The emotional toll is incredible, but the financial toll is something I am thrilled I never had to deal with, because it's insurmountable. And it even gets more complicated because, what we're seeing now is so many of these childhood disorders, Tay-Sachs is the perfect example. I mean, these kids die terrible deaths very early on. But let me just switch diseases, one I know a little bit better. So cystic fibrosis, again, a single cell disease. The kids that have it aren't able to reproduce a protein that clears their lungs. And so in the past, these kids did not make it through to adulthood. But with technologies, these kids are living into adulthood, right? And so the services that were available as children are not necessarily available as adults. So this all gets to, what are we trying to do? What is the goal of these technologies? Is it to eradicate disease? Is that what we're trying to do? And Tay-Sachs is a perfect example of that. The Jewish community has been very, very aggressive in almost eradicating it within the confines. And again, Rabbi Gordon, if you want to speak about this, you can. But again, my daughter recently got married, and during her counseling with our rabbi, it was, you guys need to get tested for Tay-Sachs. And if you're both carriers, we'll talk about it. There's pre-genetic implantation, where fertilized embryos are actually investigated as to whether or not they have a disease. The ones that have a disease are thrown out and the healthy ones are implanted. That's been around for a while. The other thing in the Orthodox community, they know who's carriers and who are not. And so the matchmaker very intentionally does not pair carriers with carriers. So again, very aggressive, but it forces us to reckon with is that the goal? Are we trying to eradicate disease? Are we trying to eradicate Down syndrome? Back to the article. And if so, what does that mean for our humanity? Anyone care to weigh in on this? Should we be eradicating Down syndrome? Or let me even give you one more problematic one. Deafness. Why else are we doing this? Any thoughts? I can talk forever, but I'd love to know what everyone thinks.
I would also be concerned about the accuracy of some of these tests. My niece, for example, when she was pregnant with child number 2, was told at one of her exams she was going to have a Down syndrome baby. And she said, well, I'm not going to do anything about that because it is what it is. And then every time she'd go to a doctor's appointment, they'd come up with a worse disease. Oh, now we think it's this. Now we think it's this. And they finally got to the trisomy 13, 18, whatever that number is. And they said, well, now we need to have a discussion. But they all along the way, they had to keep trying to figure out what they wanted to do because the diagnoses kept getting worse and worse and worse. They decided not to terminate, and she had a perfectly normal, healthy baby. And she didn't know what she was going to give birth to.
I did have a friend who.
Oh my God, that must have been so stressful.
Very, very. But it worked. But to just have a healthy baby, so it also gives me pause about the accuracy of some of these tests because they're not 100%.
You're absolutely right.
So, and I think each individual family needs to decide what they're capable of dealing with, as you said. For her, Down syndrome was not going to be a problem. It is what it is. Should you eradicate, just from people I know who have had Down syndrome babies, they bring joy and they teach you a lot about compassion and, they're a joy to their families in a lot of cases. It's not so much seen as a burden. So why would you try and eliminate what nature is doing for your convenience? I have an issue.
My sister-in-law has a relative who terminated the pregnancy because the baby was Down syndrome. And it's just something she did not want to have to deal with. And that was the reason she did it. And there's somebody locally here in Houston who's Jewish. And that was a decision that they made. It's a very hard decision. And I'm not saying I would have made the same decision as her, but it's a difficult decision. And I'm a pediatrician, and I've seen people, that have genetic testing, that it was very, very helpful preparing and knowing. I just had somebody about a year ago who, they had everything set up before the baby was born and knew exactly what the plan was. And it was very helpful for this family. Other people would rather, not know. And as you said, Debbie, there's lots of mistakes both ways. I had one that did all the genetic testing and was sure it was not a Downs baby. And there, we looked at the baby and said, this baby, we think it, has trisomy 21. And sure enough, it did. And it took a while to accept it. And, the families that know ahead of time, I've found it's very, very helpful in just preparing emotionally and all the medical treatments that need to go on.
I think the difficulty with that opinion, Hai, which I respect because you're certainly more knowledgeable than I am, is that whatever the accuracy of the particular test may be, it remains a very personal decision, and that the issue has to be on a case by case and frankly a person by person basis. And I speak with the experience of having had a Down syndrome child born in my family who lived till well over 30 years old, and was productive, to an extent. And I think that it's difficult, and I don't know this to be true. You may be able to answer the question. Is there any way of determining what is the severity of the affliction so that can be factored into a decision to be made by a parent or a set of parents?
So as Rebecca said a few minutes ago, apparently there isn't a way to determine the severity of it, which certainly puts it into question. I found High's example very interesting of the two differences of the one who said this isn't something that we're ready to deal with, and the other who said, okay, now we need to figure out how we're going to deal with it, and get ready. I have a friend who terminated a pregnancy because of these reasons. She was older, an older pregnancy, and it determined, I don't remember what if it was Down syndrome or something else, but she remembers seeing the fetus after it was extracted, and 30, 40 years later, still talks about how I looked at that fetus and I couldn't see anything wrong.
Yeah, wow.
And was wondering if she had, carried with her for a long time, if she had made the right decision or not. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody about the phrase, which many people like to say as a comfort. God doesn't give us anything that we can't handle. And right, and this woman and I both agreed that is a crock. that it's like Tevye saying, yeah, we're the chosen people, choose somebody else. That sometimes we do get things that we can't handle, but we just have to try and handle it the best we can.
Yeah, wow.
So back to what are we doing? So Denmark knows what they're doing. And I do agree that there is probably, the culture is such that people are not forced, but encouraged to. And in the article, they did, the journalist talked to people who carried the child, people that terminated, pregnancies, et cetera, et cetera. But again, I think it's really interesting to think about, what are the goals? Should medicine, I'd love to know what Hai thinks about this, should the goal be to eradicate disease? Because that's where we're going, right? Suffering, right? Reduce suffering, eradicate disease, but at what cost? What is it going to do to us if we eliminate suffering?
Back to what Debbie Swain was saying a few minutes ago, is the variety of human beings is enriching. And I know my experiences in volunteering with mentally challenged people, it really does enhance the world to have this variety. But the fact that I personally am not caring for that child, I'm coming in and meeting them and learning from them and trying to help them for a brief period of time, but I'm not the one who's providing for all their financial needs and all their emotional needs, and I'm not the one who has to deal with it 24/7. So from my perspective, I love to see the variety of the world, and I think it enhances all of us to have those differences. And at the same time, those differences enhance us and cause suffering at the same time. I don't think there's one answer to it.
There you
I
go. That
think-
clears it right up. Thank you very much.
But I think if you're talking about eradicating disease, I think that's a noble goal. The question isn't the goal. The question, of course, is how do we get there? You know, what's the process to get to that point? And if you're talking about aborting every Down syndrome baby, that's one issue. But if you're talking about trying to look to the future, you know, there are surgeries they can do on fetuses now to correct problems before a baby's born. And who's to say that if they keep researching, there wouldn't be a way to do something to correct a chromosomal abnormality before the baby is born so that nobody has to deal with it.
Well, and
But you never,
that's here.
There you go. Another great solution.
Called CRISPR. Have you guys
see how up on my chromosomes I am?
um,
But that's another way to look at it.
And so having done research on CRISPR too, I mean, the technology is here. Okay, and there's currently clinical trials going on. I actually embedded a video on how it works, but it's too geeky. I would understand it. But I mean, I still like, how does this work? But it literally, you take a virus, and in the virus, the virus is the vector. It's like the locomotive, and it goes to the place where on the chromosome where the defective gene is. It cuts it out and replaces it with a functional.
Mhm. I
Okay,
saw
so
that on Nova.
Hmm?
They're saying that this new vaccine, the RNA vaccine that this Pfizer and that has potential of doing the same thing.
Absolutely, but we're already doing this. So there's clinical trials underway with sickle cell, looking at the sickle cell population, aka a single gene disorder and they've been so far, right? They have to see what the long-term effects are. That's part of the problem. But they are going in, they are snipping away the gene that causes sickle cell and replacing it with a functioning gene, thereby eradicating the disease.
But to me, that's
sickle cell in itself was beneficial to the population that had it when
it was protective against malaria.
Right. So is that something that we really want to do?
Well, in a population where you can treat malaria, why would you want to use sickle cell if you can treat?
I guess because it was a natural mutation that was beneficial to that population.
So I think your point is right on, because we don't know, right? Where, a disorder like that we don't know the long-term effects, right? What else having what's termed a disorder or a disease could actually be protective against something else, which is, again, one of the risks that we're willing to assume as we engage in this research.
When we've seen things like this in nature, and I don't know if it's the same kind of thing, but for instance, if we try to eradicate mosquitoes, which are very annoying, but perhaps the mosquitoes are feeding the bees who are pollinating the flowers, who are giving us oxygen, and so when we start messing, I'm reminded of something that I read, and some of you might remember because I talked about it on Yom Kippur, and a story from Rabbi Abraham Twersky, who was both a psychiatrist specializing in chemical dependency and a rabbi. And he had met a couple that couldn't have children. The man was alcoholic and the woman was addicted to nicotine. And so they didn't have children until he overcame his alcoholism and she overcame her nicotine addiction. And then they had children and had a Down syndrome baby. And they were praying constantly about this child, because they said, God, how could you do this to us? after we've overcome all these other obstacles, now you give us this? And they told Rabbi Twersky our prayers were answered. And Twersky was amazed. He said, what do you mean? You know, Down syndrome is not curable. I'm a doctor, I know that. And God doesn't change the course of nature like that. I'm a rabbi, I know that. And they said, no, what we realized was we were praying for the wrong thing. We were praying for God to change the child. Instead, our prayers were answered because God changed us. And we learned to embrace the child.
Good story.
Okay, well, I don't know if that would be
You just
me.
have to be very careful what you pick and choose. I mean, I think genetic counseling is amazing and has lots of potential, but I think you have to be real careful with what you decide to change.
And I can understand the apprehension of the genetic counselors who are saying, I don't want to tell people how to make a choice as impactful as this.
Well, I mean, they're trained to provide non-directive counseling, right? And so their views are really secondary, although, you know, I'm sure they creep in somehow, but it is fascinating. And then let me end on this and where it really scares me. And this is another case that came to my attention. So this was a family, they were trying to conceive very unsuccessfully, and they were in their late 30s. They finally were able to conceive, and because of her advanced maternal age, she undergoes genetic testing. Now, this is the scary part. So the test came back with a 10% chance of a non-specified developmental disability. So it wasn't trisomy 21. It wasn't any single cell disease, just a prediction that your baby is likely to have a 10% chance of developing some developmental disability. Okay, what do you do with this? What do you do with that kind of information? And so what they did was they started going down this rabbit hole, more testing, more testing, more testing, and it never got any more specific. They couldn't tell this couple with any kind of certainty anything more than 10% chance, right? Guess what happened? They terminated the pregnancy. Which leads me to, what you talked about was, expanding this idea of normal, right? To be more inclusive, where in reality, we now have the tools available to us to say, well, if it's not perfect by someone's laboratory test, I don't want it.
But you never know, every pregnancy has some risk.
Absolutely. And what's perfection?
Yeah, and what's 10%? I mean, that's 90% not.
Right. And if you look at the literature, like our ability to deal with risk is terrible. Like we overstate risks. But, and this, is someone who's a big proponent of reproductive freedom. I look at a case like that and I'm like, oh, well, maybe, to just say, well, not perfect, or in the more extreme, not male, not female, right? I mean, this idea of getting more and more information about the fetuses that we're carrying could have dire, are we playing God?
To Carrie's point, had the couple been advised, there is a 90% chance that your child has no genetic deformity, they might have taken that completely differently.
Oh, and I'm sure they did. I'm sure that's how it was presented. They heard the opposite, right? But where are we going with this? Like, what's the end game? And And so that's really what I wanted to try and unpack with you this afternoon, is kind of what I'm struggling with as an educator in this area, to make sense of, given, where my leanings are and everything else. And the fear, again, is designer babies. And then one step forward, and I think it was Debbie, I'm not sure who mentioned it, but if you have to pay for any of this, then we get into a justice issue. Who has access to these technologies? And so we have a class that has healthier children than those who don't. And then lastly, if we start down the road of eliminating things such as Down syndrome, what resources are available to those who are stillborn with it? So those just start to diminish.
It's a lot of things to think about, and it's kind of been sort of clouding over me the entire hour, and nobody's mentioned it, but about 70 years ago, there was somebody who was trying to create a master race that they called Aryans, and there's a taste of that as well. I want to thank Rebecca for just not for telling us what to think, but for telling us what she thinks and giving us lots of things to think about. Our next lunchtime learning is going to be in 2 weeks on a Wednesday the 26th, I believe. Is that right? Yeah, Wednesday the 26th of May. And Rabbi David Goldstein, one of my favorite people in the entire world, is going to tell us about his hero, the Rabbi, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and specifically about his influence on inclusion, which might sound odd because he was the Rebbe of the Chabad Lubavitch, but he was a very inclusive kind of man. And so that'll be our next lunchtime learning. Friday, we have our Shavuot confirmation service. Janice Rubin, a wonderful performer, is going to be, or a wonderful cantorial soloist, is going to be singing with us. And anything else that we want to mention? Hi. Upcoming. You're mute.
No, that's pretty much it for the upcoming time, but that was a great presentation.
Maybe we can have a follow-up.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, and the other program I do want to mention is we're going to have a wonderful concert on May 22nd, a all ages concert with the Yedidia Family Band. They're terrific. They're exciting. And that's May 22nd at 5:30. It's going to conclude with Havdalah. So lots of excitement. Rebecca, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your engagement. Seriously, tough issues are going to take a community to resolve.
If you think I don't have your email address, send it to me, because Rebecca's going to send me the article about Denmark, and I'll forward it to everybody.
Great.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Thanks, folks. Bye. Okay, Dan. I will.
That was great.
I'm sure, because we always do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you so much.
Where did you do your training in ethics?
Oh, UTMB.
Okay, that's my wife and I met at UTMB.
Oh, get out. Okay, so you're a pediatrician and
She's a nurse.
Fantastic. Are you still practicing?
And now I just retired
Muzzle tough.
to become president of Temple Beth Torah.
My condolences. I've been there.
Right. Rebecca was president of Emmanuel at one time. I had a friend who was president of a synagogue who said, "Now I know why the Torah never refers to us as the grown-ups of Israel."
I get it. Okay, guys, I'm off. I'll see you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. We'll be in touch.